Hi everyone, I'm Gertie, and today I'm going to show you how to make a 50s style circle skirt. Circle skirts were a staple of vintage fashion, and I know you're going to love our version. So head on over to the Charm Pattern site where you can download a free pattern in sizes 2 through 34 for this fabulous circle skirt. Let's get started. Here's what you're going to need for your circle skirt. Fabric, thread to match, interfacing, stay tape, a 7-inch zipper, and a hook and bar for the closure. I've already stabilized my center back zipper opening from the waist down to the circle mark. And now we're going to take these two skirt back pieces and sew them right sides together from the zipper circle down to the hem. Sew your seam with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance using a 2.5 millimeter long stitch length. Back stitch at both ends of your seam, and now we're going to press the seam open. And leave the seam unpressed above the circle. Now it's time to sew on your pockets because we know how much you all love pockets. So let's take your skirt front, and then you're going to grab 2 of your pocket pieces. You cut 4 of these. And now you're going to put these right sides together, matching the notches like this, and pin them in place. Same on the other side. Then you're going to repeat this process with your skirt back. Pin the 2 pockets to each side seam. And now we're going to go to the machine and sew the pockets on using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, we're sewing the pockets on with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, and now we're going to flip the pocket away from the skirt and press the seam allowances towards the pocket like this. Now we're going to assemble the skirt. So we're going to put the front and back right sides together at the side seams, and we're going to pin from the waistline and then around each pocket and then from the pocket down to the hem. And now we're going to sew this side seam at 5/8 of an inch, pivoting at this inner corner here, stitching around the pocket, pivoting again, and finishing off the seam. All right, so I'm sewing my seam from the waistline. And I'm going to pivot at this inner corner. Making sure that I'm at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on my pocket. Now we're going to pivot once again, making sure again that when you pivot, you're still at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Before we can press these seam allowances open, we need to clip into the pocket seam allowances on the back side of the skirt only. And that's so that your pocket will be able to be pressed forward where you'll want to be using it on the front of your skirt, and you'll still be able to press the seam allowance open. You're going to clip between the layers, clipping to the point of your stitching on the top and the bottom of the pocket. And now you'll be able to press these seam allowances open above and below the pocket, and the pocket itself will be able to be pressed forward towards the skirt front. Okay, we're ready to put in our zippers. So, working from the right side of your skirt, just take a look at the skirt and your zipper opening. So this is the center back, right? So the right side, as opposed to the left side, the right side, you are going to take this seam allowance and press it in 1/2 an inch. On the left side, you are going to turn in and press this seam allowance 5/8 of an inch. So 1/2 an inch, 5/8 of an inch. Now at the base, you'll notice that it's 5/8 of an inch seam allowance down here, and we're pressing this in 1/2 an inch. So there's going to be the slightest little overlap right here between the two seam allowances. So you just have to smush that over. Like so. 1/2 an inch up here, 5/8 of an inch below the zipper circle. Now on the side I just pressed, that's the full 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, so there's no weirdness here at the circle where it meets the seam. Okay, we're going to start with sewing the underlap side of the zipper. So open the zipper all the way and place the zipper behind the pressed in seam allowance, the side that you pressed in 1/2 an inch. Make sure that this metal zipper stop is 5/8 of an inch below the raw waistline edge. And you're going to match this fold that you pressed so that it's right next to the zipper teeth. And put pins in vertically like this with the head towards you so that you can easily pull them out as you're stitching. And here's that little underlap we pressed in. And there we go. Now we're going to stitch this in place using a zipper foot. So I'm going to change the foot on my machine. And with this type of machine, with this type of zipper foot, you need to change your needle position as well. So I'm going to make sure that my needle is positioned close to the zipper teeth. And then I'm going to start stitching right next to that fold. when I get close to this zipper pull, I'm going to stop with my needle down and close the zipper so that it's past the zipper foot. And finish off this side of the zipper opening. Now backstitch. Okay, now let's pin and stitch the overlap side. So close your zipper all the way, and what you're going to do is you're going to take the pressed in seam allowance. This is the side we pressed under 5/8 of an inch, and you're going to take it so that it's just covering the line of stitching that you just did on your underlap. And I like to start by putting a horizontal pin at the base of the zipper, and this is where you are going to do an L shape of horizontal stitching, which is standard on a lap zipper. And then continuing up the length of the zipper, take your left hand, put it between the layers so that you are only pinning through the seam allowance on this side and then through the zipper tape underneath, not to the other side of the skirt. Okay, so continue pinning up this way, making sure that you're pinning to the left of those zipper teeth. And your pin should be about 3/8 of an inch from the fold. And you can test yourself by just opening up the zipper and making sure that it looks good. If you can't open up the zipper, then you'll need to repin somewhere. The pull can be a little bulky, so be careful there. There we go. Okay, now with the zipper all the way open, we are going to top stitch on this side of the skirt, starting at the waist with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, top stitching down the length of the zipper, stitching through the zipper tape underneath, and then pivoting at the base here at the horizontal pin and finishing off with a line of horizontal stitching to create an L shape of top stitching. Now, because of my type of zipper foot, I need to move my needle to the right side of the zipper foot. And just be careful that you're not going to stitch on top of any metal underneath the zipper stop. And then stitch 3/8 of an inch from the fold. And then stitch as close to that zipper pull as you can until it gets too bulky right there. And then you're going to stop with your needle down, lift up your presser foot, and close the zipper. You don't have to close it all the way, just so that you can stitch around the pull. And now you're going to continue stitching until you get to your horizontal pin. Stop with your needle down, pivot, and do a little row of horizontal stitching here, and backstitch. And there's your finished zipper. Okay, now we're going to sew our waistband. So first thing you're going to do is press it in half lengthwise, just to crease it with the wrong sides together. Now we are going to flip this right sides together. And we are going to stitch along this short end at 5/8 of an inch. On this side of the waistband, this becomes the underlap. So you'll see that there is a notch close to this end. So we're going to stitch along the short end, pivot at this corner, and then finish stitching at that notch. Okay, so this end we're just stitching at 5/8 of an inch along the short end. And on the other side, we're stitching along the short end, pivoting at 5/8 of an inch. And then your stitching will end at this notch. So back stitch here. Now we're going to trim our seam allowances and trim away any bulk from these corners. At the notch, you're going to need to clip all the way to your stitching as close as possible, and then trim away that seam allowance there. On this end, just trim your seam allowances, angling towards that corner. Now we will turn these corners right side out. And this helps to have maybe a little knitting needle or some sort of tool where you can poke out your corners. Okay, so now we are ready to attach the waistband to the skirt itself. So grab your skirt, and I would start at the right back side. You are going to match up this seam allowance here, and you're going to open up the waistband, so you're only pinning one side of the waistband to the skirt. Match this up to the finished edge here where the zipper is. And then this extension will extend beyond the zipper. Now you'll match any notches from the waistband to the skirt. And now finishing up on the opposite side, or the overlap side of the waistband, these two edges are going to be flush with each other. Like so. And now we're going to stitch the waistband to the skirt, keeping this edge free. Use a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So next we're going to grade our seam allowances by trimming the skirt seam allowance shorter than the waistband seam allowance. So the skirt you can trim to somewhere between 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 inch. So roughly 3/16 of an inch. Just eyeball it. trim one seam allowance alone, slightly taller than the skirt seam allowance. And next, we're going to press the waistline seam allowance towards the waistband. Now we're going to turn in the free seam allowance on the waistband so that it just covers the waistline seam and press it in place. Now you'll also want to pin it in place. To secure the waistband, you could hand stitch from the inside. If you like hand stitching, you could use a slip stitch here. Alternatively, and that's what I'm going to do, is we're going to stitch in the ditch from the right side. We're going to stitch right within this seam line, catching the fold underneath. There's your finished waistband. Okay, so let's talk about hemming your skirt. Now, with circle skirts, you have obviously a full 360-degree circle for your hem, and there's a lot of flare there, and there's a lot of bias on the skirt section. What that means is that the skirt can stretch out, becoming uneven at the hem. So you'll often hear that you need to hang a circle skirt for a full 24 hours to let those bias sections stretch out, and then you can even it up from the ground up. Now, it's not always necessary, and it depends on how stable your fabric is. Now, I'm using this very heavy denim today, which I'm almost 100% sure is not going to stretch out at all because it is so firmly woven and tight that it's not going to have a lot of looseness to stretch in those bias sections. But let's say you're using something like a rayon gauze, for instance. I have sewn dresses like that where I've seen 12 inches of stretching below the hem. So it can be very dramatic, and it just depends on how loosely woven or firmly woven your fabric is. So if you are at all concerned that your skirt is going to stretch out on the bias sections and become uneven at the hem, you're going to want to hang it on a dress form and then let it hang for at least 24 hours. And then measure from the ground up using a yardstick and mark evenly all the way around the skirt and trim it off, leaving yourself at least 3/8 of an inch to hem the dress. So I'm pressing up the hem of the skirt about 3/8 of an inch all the way around, measuring as I go. And next, I'm going to top stitch the hem from the right side of the skirt. And here I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, the last thing we're going to do is sew on our hook and bar. So you're going to close your waistband, close your zipper, and then you're going to position the hook side onto the overlap, about right here. And then the bar side will be placed in a coordinating position on the underlap of the skirt waistband. And you're going to sew this on by hand, so you have threaded a needle. And you're just going to sew through each of these little holes. Okay, so here is your finished hook and bar, looking lovely on your waistband. And so your skirt is complete. So congratulations on finishing your circle skirt. If you would like more vintage style patterns, please visit my Patreon, and I hope you will join us there. See you next time. Goodbye.